Hey, welcome to 21st Talks. We're here today to talk about a topic that everyone is familiar with, and it's disappointment. Now, disappointment's a part of life, right? But the question is why? Like, if we serve a loving God, we serve a God that cares for us, that numbers the hairs on our head. Why does he allow us to have beliefs that are wrong? I mean, if he can speak to us through dreams, he can speak through us through visions, he can speak through us through the Holy Spirit. Why does he allow me to get in a car and go to a building or go to a city or go to church when he knows that I'm going to be disappointed and that's not the way? Honestly, this topic has come up because I've been disappointed in my spiritual life. There were times where I needed guidance from God, and I spent 7 days praying and fasting to see if God wanted me to stay in San Diego or if he wanted me to go to New York, back to where I came from. And I prayed, fasted 7 days. The author of the book, when he prayed and fasted, got answers from God. But when I did it, I got nothing, right? So like, I ended up going back to New York. But the question is, why wasn't God explicit with me? Why did he allow me to be disappointed by that 7 days of prayer? And you know, the great disappointment is even greater than my personal disappointment. And I mean, but the question still remains, right? Why does God allow his faithful believers, right? I believe I'm a faithful believer. And the Millerites who were waiting for Jesus to come back in 1844 were faithful believers. Why does he allow us to, in essence, live in a state of disappointment when he can correct us? You know, and why does he allow us to spread lies, right? So like if I say Jesus is coming back on this date, I'm lying. Like, and Jesus is just sitting there, I'm having my personal devotion, I'm talking with God, the Holy Spirit is there, I'm reading the Bible, and God is just like, yeah, I'm just gonna let him keep lying. I mean, I don't know what you think about it, Vincent, but for me, it just doesn't sit well with me.
Yeah, man, it's a big topic. I gotta say, I mean, you think about it, you think about the simple fact that these people, I mean, by the way, your personal disappointments, man, I can totally understand that. And I personally, you know, I think that, you know, we have all gone through something like that or something similar. But think about that great disappointment. A group of Christians, they were so dedicated. They were living the life for Jesus, and they did it for years, for some of them for decades. And then when they finally, you know, were waiting on him, they did their Bible study. They said, okay, you know, there in the Bible, it says in Daniel 8:14, the sanctuary, which, you know, they thought is the earth, shall be cleansed in 2,300 days. And they did the math and they looked at all these prophecy dates, and they found out that Jesus was to come back in 1843 or 1844 later, and you know, they sold their properties, they did everything, you know, they were telling the whole world, everyone, they were putting their money into publishing materials, into, you know, press, and into like flyers and all that stuff, and then nothing happened, right? So I mean, we have to talk, man, we have to talk about the simple question, you know, not only why does God allow us to go through with it, or just to go through disappointments, but, you know, what's the purpose behind it? And I want to know what you think about that. So what's the purpose behind these disappointments?
I mean, I can give you the biblical answer, and then I can give you the answer of what I actually feel like, right? So
okay, I want to hear both.
Like, so the biblical answer is like, you know, Romans 8:28, all things work for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Yes, no matter what happens, it's all for my good. You know,
yeah.
Romans also talks about, you know, our present afflictions are not worthy to be compared to the glory that will be revealed, and how our light momentary afflictions, you know, are working for us a far more exceeding. So we have these verses that tell us.
Okay, yeah. But what about, I want to know your personal one, man.
My personal is like, I mean, my gut reaction, right? And this is what I've had to pray to God for, to take away from me. And it's a daily submission, right?
Yeah.
But because my gut reaction is like, what are you doing? Like, literally, why are you taking the most convoluted route to such a simple solution?
Okay, and then sometimes, I would say sometimes, you know it, like, you know, something bad happens one day, and then like the week after you look back and you're like, actually it's good that it happened because this happened afterwards, right? That happens. I mean, come on, that happens. That happened to me.
That does happen.
Yeah, but then sometimes it doesn't happen, right?
Yeah. Well,
and
most
so the
of
question
life
is, what about that?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, in essence, disappointment, you know, is there to help us trust in God? I mean, that's the biblical answer. And ultimately, that's the only thing that we have. There's so many questions on earth. But I mean, it doesn't really take away that gut feeling of like, okay, God, like honestly, was there no more efficient, loving way for you to teach me, right? Like, I'm not your enemy.
That's the doubt, right?
Yeah, that's the doubt, right? That's a doubt where it's like, yeah, like, are you really running like this universe and this plan of salvation in the most efficient and loving way?
And then, the only thing that makes us think that thought is basically it's not trusting him, as you were saying, but I believe it's also because we don't know the future. And then when 1 week has passed or 2 weeks have passed, and then we look back and we're like, hey, this disappointment happened in my life, and I still don't know why it happened, right? Then I would say, or maybe God is saying to us, why don't you wait a little longer?
Yeah, ultimately, that's really what it is. Because when we get to heaven, we're going to open up those books and we're going to see everything that happened. And I think Ellen White even talks about how if we could see like the beginning from the end, we wouldn't want anything to be changed as far as our walk with God and the ups and downs and so on. So I'm paraphrasing there, but
Yeah, but I mean, let's talk a little bit more about the big disappointment, though. The one in 1844. For those of you who don't really know what was happening there, there was a man named William Miller. He was a farmer, and he was actually fighting in war. He was a veteran, and he was fighting against the Britons in 1812. And there were two major things that happened in his life that kind of caused him to study his Bible. And that was, the first thing was he survived that war that he was in, and the second thing was that he survived also his two friends who died there just next to him during that war. And just, William Miller was someone, he was what we call a theist, someone who believes in God, but who kind of believes that God kind of created the world, the universe, but then laid back and didn't do anything afterwards, right? To just let it spin.
Like a clockmaker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then, William Miller, he starts studying his Bible because he's like, what am I doing here? What's the purpose of life and all that stuff? And he starts at Genesis. He goes all the way through actually to Daniel, and in Daniel 8:14 he jumps, he kind of hovers over that verse, and he's like, wait a minute, so does that mean that we can actually set a date for Jesus' return? So he studies, and we got to talk about that. I mean, studying the Bible for years, finding that solution that he thought was the solution, and then he didn't want to tell anyone, and then God, it's a long story, God kind of intervened, and he kind of caused him to tell other people, and now provocatively we could say caused him to tell other people a lie, right? Because that wasn't really true what Jesus was doing in 1844.
Yeah, exactly. Like that, and that's the issue. Like that's the issue I've always had from the very genesis of my walk with God. It's been why did you allow that? Right? Like it doesn't make sense to me. Like, and yeah.
But here's the thing. I do believe that something happened because of that idea that Jesus was coming back. And that was the thing that we would call heart searching, right? I mean, the people, they looked at their lives. They said, well, I got to get my stuff together. I got to get my act together. I have to really see that I am ready when Jesus comes back. And so if William Miller would have preached a different message before 1844, I do not believe that they would have actually done the same amount of heart searching and, preaching they did back then. So I believe that's already one reason why God would have allowed it.
So are you saying God needs to use like deception and disappointment and disillusionment to get his work done?
Well, I wouldn't call it deception. I would call it disappointment. Yeah, but I would say yes, actually. Yeah, I mean, because disappointments are a part of the Christian walk, right? But yeah, I don't know.
Well, let me pose this question to you, right? Vince, when you become a father, if your son is like, yeah, I'm going to sell everything I own, everything.
Yeah.
And I'm going to invest in this random currency in some country. And you literally know, because when you have a friend that's a foreign minister, like a treasurer of that country, like Secretary of State or whatever. And
I see where you're going to. Yeah. I see what you're trying to say. But here's the thing. What if I said, yes, do it, knowing that something would happen in his life that would bring him closer to me afterwards?
Wait, so
then
that's my point. So you had to well, okay, it's not deception because you're not participating in any of the lies. So, okay, I'll take that back. It's not deception, right? But it's like, like you knowingly sitting back while your son is giving up everything. He's even leaving his wife. His wife has left him because she thinks he's crazy. And you know that you could have stopped this by saying, hey, like, that currency acts, that country's gonna fall. There's gonna be a coup, and like you're gonna, all your investment's gonna be a waste, right? Like, what would you be a loving father if you sat back and allowed your son to do that? Like,
I would say I would be if I actually know what would happen at the end, and if I would know that that would be something that would be, bring him closer to me and would make our relationship better and all that stuff. But here's the thing: in your example, we don't know. Like, it would just be stupid to not tell our son, right? It would just be stupid. So, but then God, he knows, and he knows the end from the beginning. He knew that people would go through. And here's the thing: this is the second reason why I believe God, caused his people to just go through that disappointment. The first one was because they caused this heart searching. They were trying to get their act together. And the second thing was that they actually, and then also kind of, they you're kind of separating the wheat from the tares, you know what I'm talking about? Like, just seeing, hey, who's really believing that Jesus is coming back and who's just kind of like pretending to be a Christian right now. And so you have that. And then you also have the simple fact that afterwards, when Jesus did not come back, they turned back to their Bible, at least like a group of them, not all of them, but a group of them. They went back to their Bibles and they really started to study. And I believe that would not have happened if they had not gone through this disappointment. So those are kind of the two major reasons.
Wait, so you honestly believe that unless God had not allowed them to be disappointed in that way, you don't think that if he went and sent an angel to William Miller and said, hey, William, study these verses, or God could have directly told him the truth, like whatever truth it was.
That's true. But then think about this.
So why take this convoluted route of like, oh, like I want you to get closer to me, so I'm going to allow you to believe something and then you're disappointed. And instead of just like directly telling him, just tell him, like, we speak English. William Miller spoke English. Everyone on earth speaks a language. God gave us language.
Of course.
Speak to us in a language we can understand and be direct and be clear.
But then would that... Yeah, I know what you mean, man. I'm totally with you. Like, I can totally understand. But would that still be the free will that William Miller would have if God comes to a dream, to him in a dream, and he says, "This is what you need to study. If not, you're gonna die," or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean, right? I mean, that's not free will. Like, he wants his people, he wants his children to find that on their own, because then love makes such way more sense and it's way more deep and beautiful, I guess. It's like when you tell your son that he needs to do this, then the third, and then this is gonna make him love you more, then that's cool. But what if he comes up with that on his own and then he loves you more? I mean, that's just way more beautiful.
I see your point, but it doesn't. If the Bible, if God consistently acted like that throughout the Bible, I could see. I would be more sold on that.
You mean there are different examples?
Yeah, when you're talking about, when we have stories about Jonah where God is like, literally go to Nineveh, like go over there.
That's true. Like
that's
another story though. Yeah, we have to. Yeah, I mean, then we have to talk about that later.
No, but like
but here's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. One more thing I want to say though. Before we close, one more thing I want to say is that I think that you could ask yourself, okay, why using disappointments and not something else to make that happen, right? And I kind of did a little research. I kind of just went back to my Bible, and we all know that chapter. We know that chapter very well. It's 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul talks about the love, the characteristics of love, and we know that the Apostle John says that John the Revelator says that God is love, right? So we could actually substitute that in that chapter. I'm trying that a little bit here to make a point, and say, well, we have in verses 4 and verses 7, we have these descriptions of love, and it says love suffers long and love bears all things, endures all things. So isn't that kind of also kind of part of disappointment, or isn't that even like disappointment right there in that verse, to like suffer long, to endure things, and to bears all things? I mean, that's kind of even part of his character if God is love.
Yeah, but God doesn't cause confusion and disappointment and sin. We know God's not the author. He didn't cause that so that we can demonstrate these characteristics of love. Like, we are already dealing with so many aspects of disappointment. The fact that we're going to die one day, right? If Jesus doesn't come back, and people get sick, and there's the Holocaust, and there's this and that. Like, there's so many man-made disappointments and disasters that are there. So it's like, I don't need an extra spiritual disaster to make life here any harder than it is, so
And I don't think God is doing that on purpose, man. I believe, and then I go back to 1 Corinthians 10:13, where the Bible says that, he just lets us go through all the things that we can actually endure, right? I mean, there have no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. So like, he says, okay, Vincent, I know you can go through this, so I'll let it happen. And if God thinks I can't go through this, then he won't let it happen. So I don't know. I mean, it's a hard thing to swallow, but I believe that with that assurance, we can be sure, we can actually be satisfied, and we can just rest on that thought that we have a loving God, and he does allow disappointments to come into our lives, but the amount of disappointments are just going to be as much as we can handle, and then also he does it because of the reasons that we talked about, I would say.
Yeah, and like I was saying, man, it's something for me personally that I realized that when I try to analyze God through my human reasoning, I'll always reach a point where I think that God is arbitrary. I think he's a drama king. I think that because like the whole narrative of salvation, like you could have wiped Adam and Eve out at the beginning, right? Like it's like, or whatever, but then it's just like God needed to prove his love, so that he had to like allow all this stuff, and he could have erased the angels' memories. Like there's so many things that could have happened. So it's like if I let my own understanding,
wild imagination,
then it'll just reach a point where I'm like, okay, God is arbitrary. I'll say God is a drama king. I'll say all these things, and so that's the point as a Christian for me, where I have to say, okay, listen, like I'm limited, and God has already shown me that he loves me. So I have to cling on to the acts of love that I see in the Bible, and then ask for that submission so God could help me to trust him with the things that I don't understand.
No, very good point, man. And I think that's what it all comes down to. We can try to give, kind of gather the knowledge together to make sense of this, and we can try. And I think we have, gotten to some really important points today. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, you and me trusting God, because that's part of the relationship with him. And just the simple fact that he knows the end from the beginning just makes us trust in him. And it makes it easier for us, I believe. And I think that's what we should do, right?
For sure. I guess that we realize that disappointment's a part of life, and it's uncomfortable, like quite frankly. And I wrestle with reconciling disappointment with a loving God, right? That cares for me and that has a plan for me, and that is not only loving, but is just and efficient, right? Like, is disappointment really the most efficient way of handling it? And the answer is, if it happens under God's authority, then yeah, it is. It's the best way. And there are many reasons why God allows disappointment. In 1844, the Millerites were disappointed because they believed Jesus was coming back. But we see the result, right? The Seventh-day Adventist Church has grown, and we're over 20 million people now worldwide. So we see the fruits of that disappointment. And so, in a sense, even though we don't have the answers as to why specifically God had to use disappointment, we know that the benefit has been a sweet harvest. And so, in a sense, that helps me to trust God more. And I pray that in your disappointments, whatever you may be facing, that you would learn to trust God as well, because he's shown us in many different ways that he loves us. And a God that would come down to this earth and hang on a cross and die for us, I believe that's a God we can put our trust in, even in our disappointments.